Okay, going into other business. Item number 10, receiving and acting on recommendations of City Council District Elections Ad Hoc Committee concerning districting. With that, could I have staff report, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Olivia Uribe Mutal is going to present this matter, and I'm going to first give a brief introduction. And then we also have, if he can call, I think he's on the telephone, Paul Mitchell, our consultant that's been helping us with the transition from at-large elections to district elections here in Carpinteria. And that's where I'll start. As your council's aware, and hopefully the community's aware by now, the city will be transitioning for the November 2022 election to begin at that election, transitioning from at-large elections to district elections. At-large elections simply being that voters get to vote for all council members who are up for election, and district elections being that voters that reside in the district will only vote for their council candidates that are from that geographic district. So that's the big change. This is an outcome of the California Voting Rights Act, which favors district elections as being more representative, allowing for better representation of communities of interest, and a settlement agreement reached by the city that resulted in the adoption of a resolution and actions related to moving towards district elections. So your council received a presentation a couple of meetings back from our consultant and our staff about the process that's underway. And importantly, that process involves engaging the public in drafting or drawing the district boundaries for the new district election process. And your council received that update and also heard that there was a few outstanding questions that needed to be answered in order for that public engagement process to begin. And those questions would be discussed and deliberated upon with the help of our consultant and some experience from what other cities are doing by your district elections committee, council members Alarcon and Lee. Sorry, I got a sticking question.
This sounds familiar. Do you have a boilerplate that we forget to change or something?
No, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor. I do that consistently, don't I? Sorry, Vice Mayor Clark and Councilmember Alarcon as a part of the District Elections Committee. So they had a meeting. They received a report from Olivia and the consultant on this matter, and they have recommendations for you this evening to make. And with that introduction and gaffe, I apologize, I will turn it over to Olivia to present on the questions.
Good evening, Mayor and the City Council. Looks like we lost our consultant on the phone, possibly. So hopefully he'll call back in the next couple minutes. With regard to the presentations that were given, there were three questions that were addressed during this presentation. The first one has to do with whether or not there was a recommendation for 4 districts or 5 districts for the new district elections. And it was recommended by the consultants that a 5 district would be better, and that's because it would be smaller. It would be about 2,700 people compared to 3,400 people, which would allow for getting closer to a minority-majority district, 2 in fact. These districts will vote in every other election, and part of the discussion included a few things. One is whether or not there would be difficulties recruiting candidates. The second has to do with term limits. What would be the term limits of each of these new districts, and if we go to 4 districts, then the mayor would be elected at large. If we go to 5 districts, then the mayor would be elected on rotating elections. And there was a conversation about whether or not it would be possible to achieve these minority-majority districts, which, after all, is part of the goal of this change. After some discussion, the ad hoc committee made the recommendation for five district elections. And the second question really had kind of 2 parts, although the first part is not really a question, but it essentially said, it is the understanding that if we went to district elections, then these elections would be staggered. So they wouldn't all happen at once, but some would be in 2022, and then some would be in 2024. The second part of this discussion and this issue has to do not so much with the district numbering, but the election ordering, and that means, when does each district vote? A decision does not have to be made until, a decision does not have to be made until March 2022 on when each of these districts is going to vote. But in order to comply with the California Voting Rights Act, it is most commonly preferred that districts with a higher minority population, or in this case Latino population, would be ordered to come up during the higher turnout presidential election cycle. And the districts with fewer minorities will have their elections held during the lower turnout gubernatorial election cycles. It was the recommendation of the ad hoc committee that this would also be followed. Lastly, there was discussion about which software or online redistricting software would be used. 2 were recommended and demonstrated. One was called Maptitude Online Redistricting, and the other was called Districter, which was done by Tufts University. And that was the one that was recommended by the consultant for its ease of use, its ease to understand, and its detail that can be accessed. And it was a recommendation of the ad hoc district elections committee members as well that the city elect this software. So we have Paul Mitchell on the line, right? And I'm also available to answer any questions that are additional to any of these points, and we can address them as you wish.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did Paul have anything he'd like to add to?
Paul, is there anything else you want to add?
No. The memos, I think, were pretty extensive representation of my thoughts on the issues.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of staff on the report?
I do, through the mayor. It's not, Olivia, thank you for all that information on your presentation. It's not very likely that it would happen, but what would happen if there were not a nominee for one of the districts?
That's a question that I don't know the answer to. Paul, were you able to hear the question?
Was it what would happen if somebody didn't run for one of the districts?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so you would want to double check with your city attorney because there can sometimes be different issues in charters. But if there was nobody who had filed for office, then I think the practice would be that the city council would be able to appoint somebody from that district. But again, you want to check with your council and have them do a little bit of homework because it might vary by agency.
All right, thank you. It's not very likely that it would happen, but it could.
And Councilmember Cardy, through the mayor, I don't have that answer off the top of my head. We are not a charter city, so we'd be just subject to state law, but we can look into that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of staff? One quick question. We're deciding to go with 5 currently. That is the recommendation as opposed to 4. In thinking over and regionally, most of the cities that have gone through this process have gone to a mayor at large. So my question would be, why would they not have gone with the recommendation of more districts?
I think that the 2 committee members can speak to that. As Olivia mentioned, the advantage of 5 versus 4 is it gives better opportunity for representation of communities of interest. In particular, in our case, Latino majority or close to majority areas of our community neighborhoods. So at the meeting of the committee, and committee members again can respond to this, they received information, examples of how you could divide up the city geographically into 5 districts. And by doing it in 5, you got higher Latino majority areas within districts. And so that suggests, just by the numbers, that you could divide up the community geographically and mapping in a way where you could get 2 districts in that way. So that's the advantage of 5 versus 4. If you do 4, the numbers go down, and so the potential exists of not as significant a majority in those districts, and perhaps not getting two districts that have Latino majorities. And it's not a majority over 50, it's just a higher majority mix in those districts. It goes from, I think, low 40s, as I recall, 41% up to something like 48%.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Reason I brought that one up and I asked that question is when we were listening to this, we had our hearings based on that. There was an active group of representatives from the Latino community that expressed a concern that we had not included in that a member at large. So it sounds like we're going the opposite direction now, because their recommendation was that they wanted to see a member at large versus and 4 versus the 5, which is now kind of contrary to what we're looking at. Just curious. It's kind of unusual that we would switch that much.
Your Honor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I think our, and Natalia could speak also. I mean, there's other sort of more minor pros and cons either way, but it seemed like the main onus of the agreement that was brought to us was the goal was to have more opportunities for minority population representation, and so our primary focus was on the number of districts and not necessarily who's going to be the mayor.
Got it. No,
So
good.
that was our primary concern in going that way, and that's automatically that's the mayor is selected, and it to me it's sort of, I mean, it's kind of how we do things, so it's less of a major change for everybody to have to go through. This is a big change, and so that would just be one less one.
No, I agree. Thank you for the hard work. No, I appreciate that. I just was trying to get clarification on that point specific. We are also looking at the staggered terms and what would happen if, in fact, the districting actually overlapped with current council members. So has that been resolved, or is there a process for that?
That was addressed during the conversation with the Ad Hoc District Elections Committee, and what was essentially explained is that what we are trying to do is create districts that are smaller and representative, and we're not trying to create districts that maintain the status quo. So if there were 2 council members that are in the same area, then there would just be an election and just be part of that process. Yeah.
Okay. Only because we're gonna have a one-time, unusual circumstance potentially where you're gonna have an overlap of two representatives from the same region until a change occurred for the next vote, which would be 2 years later.
That's a possibility.
It's an interesting one. Yep. And then the other question regarding term limits that was brought up in your discussion. Was there a resolution on that part?
The term limits would be 4-year terms, and on every other election cycle. So every 2 years there would be an election, and what was not discussed was a term of the mayor, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I'll respond to that. I believe we did discuss it, and we thought what we're currently doing now is what we would stick with in terms of the 2-year
Okay.
term for a mayor.
Okay. My question was more whether we were deciding on a 2-year maximum or three-term maximum or something like that.
Just
But
to-
that, evidently that was not included in that.
Yeah, we can talk to Paul. That question did come up. Can term limits be considered, just like we have the opportunity to transition to a elected mayor? Can we transition also as a part of this to having term limits that we don't currently have? And the answer, I believe, was no, but I'll that has to be handled separately by voters or legislation. But maybe Paul, if he heard that question, can confirm.
Yeah, I would concur with that.
Perfect.
Different issue.
Yeah.
than
Okay.
this.
Thank you. Good job there. Okay. You have any questions? Roy?
I do. The purpose of the 5 districts is to have Latino majority districts, correct? But there are other minorities in this community. Are they being represented as well, equally?
The goal of the smaller district is to allow for greater diversity, representation. In our community, we have a majority of Latinos as minorities. We don't have a significant additional minority population, and therefore that is not why it's not referred to by name, so to speak.
Yeah, we use that Latino example because it's a good example of how geographically communities of interest may be defined in our particular case. But we'll definitely go through a process, and that process will have community members identifying their communities of interest. And community of interest is a term of art that means a neighborhood or geographically defined group with shared interest or characteristics that could be affected by district boundaries. So if there's another minority group out there that defines themselves geographically in a certain area and they can communicate that through a process, that may influence boundaries and that ultimately come before your council.
Also, if I could add, this will be based on new data that will be coming out, that we still expect new census data to come out before the maps occur. So it's possible that should we have more new information, we'd be able to gather that as well.
Great. All right, thank you.
Through the mayor, so it's very important that the community, the public is engaged in this process, and somehow we need to communicate that they need to do so.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that that's a very good point, and this is the kind of a launching point. By answering these questions tonight, it really cuts us loose to start doing the public outreach process, because we know now when we communicate about drawing maps that we're communicating, assuming the council moves forward this evening, about 5 districts, so we know how that people can go about drawing it. We can provide them the data and the resources to do that. The other thing is on the question of the type of outreach that we're going to do, the web-based software platform we're going to use, and that we're going to provide paper maps. making those decisions now allows us to really engage in those processes with, a concrete idea about how we're going to ask the community to engage us with us in the work.
Is, through the mayor, just one more quick question. After the boundaries are drawn, and it's not, is there some point that it's not official that people can protest and actually say that the boundaries aren't right?
Yeah, and I'll ask Olivia or Paul also to talk about this, but it is a public hearing process, so your council will receive mapping ideas, and then be able to tweak those mapping ideas and hear public input and say, okay, well, what does it look like when we move the line over one block or one street, and those kind of things. So it's definitely intended to be an iterative process that takes into consideration public comment, both during the formation of mapping ideas and then also when you're considering those maps for
Good.
people to have public comment opportunity and the opportunity to modify maps and look at how that works.
All right, thank you.
Brian's also just helped us put the timeline for when we expect to have, or we would like to be able to have the maps and the public process.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
A quick question or clarification. For the recommendation on the first page, which is the second bullet, in terms of in which districts will come up for election by relying on the elections code, section 10010B, should that also include A? I saw written in the staff report it's inclusive of A and B, unless I'm incorrect.
So what that means is Section A basically says that the elections are going to be staggered.
Mm-hmm.
Section B says that the elections in majority minority districts will come up during the presidential election cycle, and the fewer minorities will have elections held during the lower turnout gubernatorial election cycles. So
Okay.
that's just the A covers the first part that they're going to be staggered, and the B
Okay.
covers when.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other questions? One quick question I have, that would be, we're making the decision this evening. However, has it ever been decided by, or should it be decided or potentially decided by the community as far as the direction we're going? I want to make sure that it's in our purview as council to move forward with this rather than putting it to the community.
Well, this would be the opportunity for the community members to state their preference at a meeting like this. At some point, the decision has to be made about whether or not we're mapping for 4 or 5 districts. So tonight's when that decision will be made. I suppose that through the mapping process, as the council considers iterations and gets input, if it looks like there's challenges with 5 and there's reasons to reconsider 4, that could be done. But I'll turn to Paul to comment about that in the map making process. Is Paul still on the line? Could you prompt him there?
Paul, did you hear that?
Yeah, I could hear my name brought up, but I wasn't able to hear anything but something about Paul and the map making process.
Paul, the question was, as we make a decision tonight about going with 5 districts, is it possible that during the actual mapping process and when it comes back to the council, that going from 5 to 4, that the number of districts could be reconsidered as a part of that process?
Well, I would say that the ultimate decision would be a decision by the council, and there's no legal requirement that they don't make a different decision when it comes time to actually approve plans. But I think for the public and best public engagement, it's probably good to have a firm understanding of what we're looking to as the public is submitting draft plans and as you're doing outreach. So I would say that there would be nothing that your lawyers could flag and say that you can't make a different decision when you get to the final adoption of plans, but it probably would be best for the process that the public was given clear direction. Does that make sense?
Council members, through the mayor, I don't disagree with that statement. I do, and I also agree with Paul's statement that the public should have clear a clear idea of what direction the council is going in. I would suggest that if we do if we go against the recommendation of the committee, that it should be taken back to the committee for further discussion.
Also, just to add, and just because I like to have background on things, in the memo that was sent about council redistricting decision 4 or 5 seats, it says, for background, this kind of change would generally require a vote of the public. However, the safe harbor provision of the California Voting Rights Act allows the agency to consider adding council members or changing their election structure as part of this transition.
Thank you. That was a clarification I was looking for. Appreciate that. Okay, any other questions?
For me, just a statement. I agree with most of what the committee has recommended, but I feel that having a 4th district and at-large mayor will be more important. I think it's time that we let the community decide who is mayor. I think that's long overdue, and I think that's very important that we consider that.
Thank you. We are still questions for that one. At this time, if there's no more questions of staff, I will go to public comment. So if there's no more questions, public comment. Brian?
Mayor, I do not see any hands raised in Zoom, and we have no telephone callers.
Great, thank you. I will then close public comment, bring it back to the council. Anybody wishing to take action on this item?
Mayor, if I may, I'll just repeat what I just said. For me, I would like to. I move to accept and approve the recommendations of the district ad hoc committee, with the exception of possibly the committee go back and discuss whether to have 5 or 4 districts. With, my comment about the importance of the community's electing a at-large mayor.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second? No second. The motion dies. Any other actions anybody wish to take?
I'll go ahead and move the staff recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second on that one?
I will second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Alarcon,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee,
No.
Vice Mayor Clark,
Aye.
Councilmember Cardy,
Aye.
and Mayor Nomura.
Aye. Thank you, and thanks for the hard work.